the role of coding standards within these guidelines. So why do we have coding standards? Well, it's not just to meet the requirement of the process standards or the safety standards. It also helps you to develop high quality code. We can look at some of the software quality attributes of functionality plus reliability, the usability of your software, the efficiency, how easily it is to maintain, and portability. So when you upgrade compiler, for example, or if you move to another platform, how portable is your code? There are these considerations that will be taken into account in a software coding standard. Coding rules are used to promote the software quality attributes. They're used to define the safer subset of the coding language. So as we see, we've got the whole of the C++ standard, for example. There's a lot of stuff in there that would be deemed unsafe to use. It's undefined behavior. Elements are open to misinterpretation or they're unpredictable. Different compilers write things to be produced in different ways. So these things have been taken out of the C++ standard in, say, the MISRA C++ subset, the recommendations of MISRA C++, or JSF, for example, or HICPP. But how do you write your own coding standard? What makes a good coding rule? Well, you should look at the best practices which have been documented from the coding standards or from language experts. Good coding rules often require collaborative information. A quotation from Paul Burden on the MISRA C working group, who works for programming research: "Making rules is easy, but making good rules is more difficult." So a coding rule, the document should be small enough and easy to read and digested so that your coders, your developers, are able to understand these rules. They should be clear and unambiguous. They need to be. They should have adequate explanations of the purpose behind each rule. This helps to get the developer on board, make them understand the reasoning behind why you're telling them they can't do something. But avoid over-regulating this, because it can make it more difficult for your developers if you're too restrictive. And ideally, it should be able to be automated. Whether it's compliant or not compliant should be black and white, and this makes it able to be automated. So here we have a number of different coding standards for C and C++. Again, this is by no means all, and there will always be internally written coding standards. But here on the left we have the C standards, MISRA C, for the automotive industry, the Cert C, which is more focused on security and used quite highly in the defense. We have the embedded C coding standard and the power of 10, which is just 10 rules. And on the right we have the C++ standards for MISRA C++ again by Myra, the automotive industry, high integrity C++, written by Programming Research and freely available, or the JSF by Lockheed Martin. So these are some common coding standards. How do you choose one? Or how do we know which ones are used in the industry? So this is some information from some independent research done by VDC Research. The report is available from our website. This data was obtained from 600 respondents from the embedded and enterprise IT market, including automotive and aerospace. This shows the adoption of the coding standards by the 600 people who replied to this question. So you'll see that the ones that are used most frequently are in-house coding standards. But the standard ones that I showed on the previous page, we have MISRA C, Cert C++, HICPP, Cert C, and MISRA C++. Interestingly, a lot of people don't know whether they have a coding standard or not. So we've looked at these different coding standards, and we previously talked about how coding standards are used in the different process and safety standards. So let's go back to the IEC 61508 and ISO 26262. You remember these tables from earlier. These are the tables that go through the requirements, to the highly recommended or recommended requirements for the IEC 61508 on the right and ISO 26262 on the left. And I'd like to just show these side by side and do a little comparison. So if you remember, ISO 26262 is a derivative of the IEC 61508 and came quite a lot later. So the first one that I notice is the dynamic objects or variables. This is replacing numbers 2 and 3 on the IEC 61508. They've been grouped together for dynamic objects and variables. It's difficult to determine the difference between an object and a variable depending on the coding language that you're using. We have limited use of pointers used in both. We also have no implicit or no automatic type conversions, basically the same thing. No unconditional jumps and no unstructured control flow in programs in higher level languages. And again, both limited use or even no recursions in ISO 26262. If I turn all of those on together, you'll see how most of the things that were taken from the IEC 61508 have been used in ISO 26262, and lots of things have been added into the ISO 26262 Table 8. Number 1 is just the use of coding standards, and number 4 is a limited use of interrupts. And this is more of a hardware thing. So here we look at the tables again, and now we're going to consider the higher adopted coding language MISRA-C, and specifically for the automotive industry. And let's look at how MISRA-C coverage across these tables. So here for ISO 26262, you'll see every entry is covered by MISRA-C, which strongly points that when they were writing the ISO 26262 standard, they did consider MISRA-C as the standard that they wanted you to use. And for the IEC 61508, which is a generic standard not specifically automotive, but MISRA-C does cover the majority of these again. You'll see 3B here is the online checking of installation of dynamic variables. Online checking. Some of it could be done by static analysis with data flow, but this is really pointing towards dynamic analysis. And again here, this limited use of interrupts. This is hardware and runtime behavior, not really a static analysis tool. But how would you choose a tool to perform the checks so that you can claim compliance to these standards? Well, you can't always trust what the tool vendor tells you about their coding standard enforcement. So what could you do to choose a tool? Well, other than looking at them yourselves, you could look at some independent research done on static analysis tools. Terra Labs recently published their independent research. Terra Labs are within a research division of the University of Antwerp in Belgium. They wrote their own test code rather than using the MISRA exemplar suite. They asked a panel of industrial partners, which didn't include any tool vendors. They asked them which of the MISRA rules would they seem to be key, and they picked 11 of them. And they wrote their own test code, as I said. Now, after this, after they had done their research, there's a quotation here from Marina Temmerman. On paper, all the selected tools claim to provide comprehensive MISRA-C compliance checking, but the reality was different. And this is something we hear about a lot, that people claim 100% compliance to MISRA-C in a static analysis tool. You can see the full report on our website. But if we look at just the QAC tool, here we have, up on the vertical, we have false negatives. So a false negative is where no error is reported, but an error does exist. So a false negatives. And as we go up the scale, a reduced number of false negatives. So this shows that at the top, every violation has been reported by the static analysis tool. Along the horizontal axis, we have false positives. And a false positive is where the tool has reported an error or a violation, but no error exists. And as we move to the right of this slide, where no false positives, shows that all that's been reported is correct. And QAC performed very well in this independent research that was done, and all 11 selected rules had no false positives and no false negatives. So even Terra Labs think that the QAC tool is a good static analysis tool.